Let's dive right into one of the most profound and honestly painful questions that the Apostle Paul ever had to tackle. Deep in his letter to the Romans, he confronts this crisis of faith that was brewing, a question about God's promises, about human failure, and really about the very character of God himself.
You see, this was the question hanging heavy in the air for the early believers. Many in Israel had rejected their own Messiah, Jesus. And so people were wondering, did God just move on? Did he just cast aside the very people he chose, the ones he made all those incredible promises to?
And Paul's answer, right at the start of Romans chapter 11, it's not some gentle correction. No, it's an abrupt, it's emotional, and it's an absolute refusal of the very premise of the question. It's just this thunderous declaration that God's faithfulness is unshakable.
Now, we have to understand, this wasn't just some abstract debate club topic. This was real life. For some of the Gentile believers, this idea that God has moved on from Israel was starting to breed a really dangerous kind of arrogance. And for the Jewish believers, it could lead to nothing but utter despair. So Paul is confronting something that was threatening the very heart of the early church.
So before Paul even starts building his big theological case, he presents Exhibit A, himself. His own life, his own story, is the most personal and powerful proof that God has absolutely not abandoned his people.
I mean, just look at the guy's resume. He is a Jew. He's from the historic tribe of Benjamin. This is the man who was once the fiercest opponent of the church, a persecutor of Christians. And now he's an apostle of the very Jesus he once tried to destroy. His life is this living, breathing proof that God's plan of grace for his people is very, very much alive and well.
Okay, so let's dig a little deeper into just how forceful Paul's answer is. Because this isn't a simple disagreement. This is a fundamental rejection of a lie about who God is.
The language Paul uses in the original Greek, it's about as emphatic as you can get. It's like he's slamming his fist on the table. It's not just, I disagree. It's a declaration that the very thought is unthinkable, a theological impossibility.
Paul says God has not rejected the people he foreknew, and we have got to understand this word. In the Bible, to foreknow isn't just about God looking into the future and seeing what would happen. No, it's an active, relational, powerful word. It means to set your love upon someone, to enter into a binding covenant with them, to claim them as your own.
And this, right here, is the core of it all. God's choice, his covenant love, it came before Israel ever did anything good or bad. And because his promise is rooted in his own perfect character, it's strong enough to survive our absolute worst failures. His faithfulness doesn't depend on ours. Thank God.
Okay, so if God hasn't rejected his people, how do we explain all the widespread unbelief Paul was seeing? Well, his next point reveals this incredible principle that's always at work, often behind the scenes, the principle of the faithful remnant.
To explain this, Paul reaches way back into Israel's history, to the story of the great prophet Elijah. If you remember from 1 Kings chapter 19, Elijah is at rock bottom. He's hiding in a cave, he's in total despair, and he is 100% convinced that he is the last faithful person left in the entire nation. He feels completely and utterly alone.
And right here, we see this stunning gap between our limited human perspective and God's sovereign reality. Elijah, in his despair, says, "I'm the only one left." But what does God say? He reveals a totally different story. He declares, "I have kept for myself 7,000 who have not bowed the knee to Baal." You see, Elijah saw only failure. God saw a faithful remnant that he himself was preserving.
And you have to pay attention to that phrase Paul quotes, "I have kept for myself." Who's the one doing the action there? It's God. The remnant exists not because a few people were super strong and held on tight. It exists because God, in his sovereign grace, held on to them.
And that leads us straight to the source of it all. This isn't about human merit. It's not about being good enough. It is entirely 100% a beautiful work of God's unearned initiating grace. Paul just lays out the logic here, and it is airtight. Step 1, the remnant exists because God chose them by grace. Step 2, okay, if it's by grace, then it absolutely cannot be by works. And step 3, if it were by works, then grace wouldn't be grace anymore, right? It would just be a wage you earned. The two ideas simply cannot coexist.
So what does this all mean for us? It means this truth, that God chooses. It's never ever meant to be a source of pride. It's meant to produce deep, profound humility.
It's supposed to make us stand in awe of God's grace, not make us feel superior to anyone else. It's all about Him, not us.
And now we arrive at the absolute center of it all. Jesus isn't mentioned by name a whole lot in these first few verses of Romans 11, but he is the unspoken reality holding up every single word Paul writes.
You see, in Paul's day, and still in ours, the ultimate distinction isn't between Jew and Gentile. The real dividing line runs right through the heart of Israel, and really, right through the heart of all humanity. It's the line between those who receive Jesus as the Messiah and those who do not.
And what that means is that Jesus is the very center, the gathering point of the faithful remnant. Belonging to God's preserved people isn't ultimately about your bloodline. It's about being rooted in Christ. The true community of the faithful is the community that is found in Him.
And this reveals the great tragedy that Paul is grieving. Jesus is the fulfillment of every single promise God ever made to Israel. He's what their entire history was pointing towards. And yet so many stumbled over the very one who is the embodiment of all their hopes. So, as we reflect on this, we find these incredibly firm, stabilizing truths. We learn that God's promises are not fragile things that we can just break. Our failure, and we all fail, cannot cancel His faithfulness. We see that judgment and mercy can somehow beautifully coexist within God's perfect plan. And we're reminded that God is always at work, often through small, unseen remnants, far beyond what we can see with our own eyes.
In the end, this is the anchor for our souls. God has not rejected His people because God does not abandon those He has set His covenant love upon. And Jesus Christ stands at the very center of that faithfulness. He isn't a replacement for God's promises. He is the reason, the means by which God remains and will always remain true to His every single word.